Welcome to an especially grim and candlelit edition of One on One with the Grim One. I am your host, the Slayer of Posers, Master of Disaster, the most electrifying man in corpse entertainment, the Necrosexual! And joining me for this dangerous meeting, I have a guest. This man is the father of 1,000 riffs, and his bass licks have inspired countless mosh pits, and he's entering his 5th decade, delivering the hits in the horror business. Welcome, Danny Lilker.
Hey man, how you doing?
Grim. Totally grim. Danny, how the hell are you?
I'm doing fine. Obviously, like a lot of people who are also watching this, I've been home for a while, and I'm going to be home for a while, but I'm healthy, I'm grim, I'm not infected, and I'd like to make a point that black metal people were doing social distancing for the last 40 years anyway, because
Right.
we don't like people and we stay away from them. So I think not only did we already flatten the curve, but we were ahead of it. So
Definitely ahead of the times, as usual. So this is an episode of One on One with the Grim One, and every episode our guest selects one album that holds a special place in their dark hearts. And this is an extremely appropriate album to talk about because this was a pioneering record that defined an entire genre. And you yourself, Danny, you're a pioneer. You were pretty much there. You have roots in the beginning of extreme metal, from thrash metal to crossover to black metal to death metal to grindcore. Bands like Anthrax, Nuclear Assault, Stormtroopers of Death, Brutal Truth, and those are just a few of the ones. And of course, your new band, Blurring, from Rochester. But, Danny, tell me about the record you've selected to discuss for this episode of One on One with the Grim One.
I have selected Darkthrone's Ablaze in the Northern Sky. And I didn't even know you would be wearing corpse paint when I made the selection. I just did this because I was trying to think of a transformational album. I could have easily have just picked Scum from Napalm Death, or maybe Rain and Blood, Ace of Spades, other records that really put a boot in the ass genre and got it going. Now, there was black metal before Darkthrone, but this was the first part of the second generation where they kind of split it up. So obviously there was more. I may be getting ahead of myself here, but some of their compatriots from Norway did stuff that was a little more controversial and sensational around this time period. Darkthrone did not. They just played music and didn't go to prison or do anything stupid.
Yeah, they stuck to their guns and they've been blazing for the better part of 30 years now. And on that record, you noted that they weren't the first black metal band, and sometimes there are certain semantic arguments, especially with the keyboard warriors, but who do you consider to be the first black metal band?
Well, I'm not even talking the second generation stuff, and there's arguments about who was around first, Darkthrone or Mayhem. If you're talking about the first black metal bands, then I'd say arguably Venom.
Yes.
Venom were not hardcore Satanists or nothing like that. They just wanted to be Kiss and Judas Priest and Motorhead, and they put real evil lyrics on it just to be as shocking and provocative as possible at the time, which I know all about having played in S.O.D. But I would say as far as the imagery and lyrics, that I would give Venom that credit. And okay, yeah, they were not fiercely dedicated occultists, but I think a lot of the bands that say they were not, and I know some of those people. So
Yes, they might not have been fiercely dedicated occultists, but they were definitely fiercely dedicated rock stars. And there's no right or wrong answer, but I think the answer is Venom there, because they had an album called Black Metal, even if it was stylistically a lot different than the second wave that would come. And speaking of S.O.D, you guys recently had a virtual reunion of sorts with your S.O.D bandmates. Tell me about that, Danny.
I was contacted by Scott and Charlie, and they asked me if I wanted to do a home quarantine version of March of the S.O.D, the first song on the record. the two songs we've done, which is that and Chromatic Death, are both mostly instrumental songs because Billy hasn't really participated in anything in the band for a while. I'm not going to get into why. It's not really my thing to talk about, but suffice it to say that when I was contacted, it was just, wouldn't it be cool to do an S.O.D. song? You just got to follow along to Charlie's drums and get yourself filmed playing bass. And I said, sure. And the whole thing with this whole self-quarantine thing is the constant refrain in the back of your head from Megadeth, which has got nothing better to do. So that's I did that. Now, when I did March of the S.O.D., that was the first song we did with this little quarantine thing. And I got better at the technique with Chromatic Death, the second song we did, because I did a separate audio bass track. The first one, which was March of the S.O.D., I just kind of played with a practice amp, had my lovely other half film it, but the bass wasn't loud enough, and people took note of that. So I said, we need to do another song with some loud fucking bass. So let's do Chromatic Death. It doesn't have vocals. That'll make it easy. And it's got a prominent bass riff, so that'll be a way to address the situation. So on the second song, when you see me playing bass, I'm just lip syncing. I already did the bass track on my computer, playing along with drums.
Milli Vanilli style.
Rocking out for the camera. There is audio on it, so I could go chromatic and all that. But yeah, MTV style.
Have you stayed in touch with your bandmates like Charlie and Scott a lot recently, or was that the first time you've touched base in a while?
Just here and there, kind of like texting Christmas cards crap. You know, how's it going? Hanging in there, you know, quarantine thing. Hey, man, doing okay, blah, blah, blah. Just, yeah, a little bullshitting here and there every few months. Yeah. This is the most we've been in touch constantly for a while, put it that way, as far as, okay, we're going to do another song. Because there are a couple of more songs that will be coming up, I will reveal, although they will be cover songs. I'm just going to say that until they actually come out. So you heard it here first.
There you go. Necro TV News. I like that. Thank you for the scoop. And isn't that the bass player's constant dilemma? The bass isn't loud enough, so the same things you have to persevere. But I'm glad to see you guys haven't missed a beat. But going back to Darkthrone, A Blaze in the Northern Sky. This record came out in February 1992. What was your first impression when you listened to that for the first time?
I went, Jesus, what the fuck happened to these guys? Anybody who had heard Soulside Journey would have heard of this. And you know what's even funnier, Mr. Necro, is not just my reaction to it, but Hammy from Peaceville. It was his label. Now, I was in a joke hardcore band then called Extra Hot Sauce. I was the drummer. That's why I was a joke. I wasn't the best drummer. The bottom line is, me and Hammy were in touch a lot. The guy who put out Darkthrone's records. So, now remember, this is early 90s, before emails and texts and Facebook and all this crap. I was on tour in Europe in 93. Brutal Truth was out on tour with Fear Factory. And we started that tour in Vienna, or we were in Vienna or something, and I was flipping through records at my friend Alex from Punch and Stench store. He worked at a store called Why Not, with a question mark, and I came across Blaze. And I said, oh, Darkthrone. And I looked at that, and I looked on the back, and first I looked on the front, and I was like, who's that scary guy with the white face? And then looked on the back, and they were all like that, and I was like, geez. And then, yeah, I'd heard something. Keep in mind, this is almost 30 years ago, so I remember hearing them, because I might have actually heard Under a Funeral Moon first and gone back and rediscovered Blaze, but I saw Blaze first in a record store. So I know it's a bit of a funny story. But then when I ran into Hammy from Peaceville in England, we were having a drink or a smoke or something, and I said, how's the label going? Yeah, I go, geez, what's up with Darkthrone, man? And he did a little face plant, and he goes, I don't know what the hell happened to those guys. You know, they were just good old heavy, brutal death metal. But then they sent me a record that sounded like it had been recorded in a garbage can, and they all looked like King Diamond on the back. So I was like, well, and then that's right before everything blew up with that. That's right around when the church burnings started getting attention because Kerrang magazine was feeding off Euronymous and Varg, and they were feeding off Kerrang. Obviously, while they were still friends, those two dudes, because
Right.
obviously they kind of grew apart a little.
A little falling out.
Yeah, just a minor falling out. But yeah. So what was my point? The wine's kicking in.
So you were familiar with Darkthrone when they were still a death metal band featuring Hank Amarillo and company with their debut album.
You know that Hank Amarillo was just the only reason that name was on there is because the real Hank Amarillo is a name on the thank yous of Bonded by Blood.
Oh wow.
So Fed picked it out of a hat, literally. But yes, Hank Amarillo is some random dude who hung out with Exodus, I guess.
Yeah. Interesting. Cool.
But yeah, Darkthrone then sounds like a hodgepodge of like, what would you say, Autopsy and Entombed, you know, something like that. And then and that's still a great record, you know, Cromlech and all that stuff. But they took a hard turn. You know, they started hanging out with Euronymous and started listening to exclusive Bathory Hellhammer Diet. And I just, yeah, when I heard that record, it really interested me because I had heard about all this second wave of black metal stuff, but I had no idea what it sounded like. So I was glad to see that it was really fast and intense. For all I knew, it was just like creepy ass slow shit. I had no idea. So yeah, and that's the record that launched 1,000 fucking records. You know, I mean, Mayhem might have got all the attention, but as you know, De Mysterious came out at least a year or two after that one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say they got in there at the beginning as far as the second wave of black metal with all the trappings and all that. And they did it without doing anything illegal or controversial either, mind you. So, or Carpathian Farce, they didn't do any of that shit either. So,
Right.
credit for that. I'm not taking anything away from Emperor or, you know, any bands like that that might have had people that got in trouble for various things, but they those guys just managed to do it without any of the accompanying sensationalism bullshit, and I think, you know, they earned it.
Indeed, they've stuck to their guns, not just with those records, but to this day. So I certainly respect Darkthrone for their body of work. And at the end of the day, they're a bunch of dudes who love metal, not just black metal, but doom metal, speed metal, punk, thrash. They've expanded and they've evolved throughout their careers. And at each step, I think that their sonic evolution is still true to their do-it-themselves work ethic. And there's a lot of bands that evolve and change their sound, but there's not a lot of bands that evolve and change their sounds and still sound good.
Well, I would agree with that. They've managed to maintain the driving force of what they are, and you know, if they're playing stuff that sounds more like Discharge or GBH or whatever they were doing, it still has their spirit. It still has, you know, because the kind of black metal, even when they were playing full-on black metal, had a whole kind of punk edge to it anyway. The chords were stranger, and maybe there was an acoustic guitar thrown in here and there. But
Yes.
Darkthrone weren't about keyboards or symphonic stuff. It was just straight ahead, and that embodied a punk ethic to me. So it made sense when they were drifting more toward a pure punk rock sound on some of that Circle the Wagon stuff, but it was still had their essence and their spirit. And it wasn't just like, let's try doing this or any bullshit. It's just, you know, for those guys, if they would have kept playing, you know, fucking blast beat black metal at that point, that would have been more of a sellout because they would have been doing what was expected of them instead of what they wanted to do. So, cheers.
So in 1992, you mentioned that you were on tour with Fear Factory. With the music of that Darkthrone album, like what was happening in your personal life, in your musician life? You know, you had already been in the game since the early 80s. So like can kind of paint a picture of what it was like back then.
Well, that would have been the year after I left Nuclear Assault for good and focused my energies directly on Brutal Truth. In 92, we had put out Extreme Conditions Demand Extreme Responses, so we were touring on that. And then our Perpetual Conversion EP came out in 93. So we were touring. We still had our original drummer, Scott Lewis. But that black metal stuff, like Darkthrone, Mayhem, and all that was all starting to seep into my subconscious because I'd always appreciated stuff like Venom and Bathory and Hellhammer. But then in the late 80s, I got bored with black metal because Venom was just kind of fell off a little bit. Destruction was getting a little too technical. Sodom had progressed into more of a band that was doing anti-war kind of thrash metal stuff, and I'm not putting that down at all. Obviously, I did a bunch of that myself. But the point is that what black metal was in the mid-'80s, that feeling had been lost. So I just kind of got bored with that. Now, when U.S. death metal bands on the grindcore tip, like Morbid Angel, once they got Pete in the band, kind of reignited some of that because now evil, fast music that you can enjoy again. And then, so in 92, 93, I was, like I said, freshly out of Nuclear, focusing totally on Brutal, playing extreme grind. Although back then it was a little more like death grind before we got our second drummer, Rich. But for me personally, yeah. I was on the hunt for extreme music. I found grindcore, and then when black metal came up, I'm like, well, this is fucking awesome too, because it's brutal and extreme and ugly, and that's what I wanted to listen to and play.
And that's another thing I've always admired about you, Dan, aside from your work ethic, of that era. You were somebody that started off in pretty much like pure thrash, and then you went toward crossover, and then more of a death metal, grindcore, and black metal, roots. But you're somebody that always evolved and started of that, that 80s era and continued to get heavier through the 90s. And while that's pretty common now with people, they have a ton of side projects and different musical stylings. I think of that time, you were one of the only people that really stands out for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose so. I was just kind of chasing a feeling, and I just wanted to do more and more intense stuff. And it's funny because, like 15 years ago when all these message boards came out and stuff, and, like keyboard warriors and stuff, some people would be like saying, oh, you're just following trends. And I'm like, no, I was just doing exactly what I wanted to do. And by the way, fuck you.
So going back into that record, A Blaze in the Northern Sky, you mentioned that it sounded like it was, or you said your friend at Peaceville mentioned that it sounded like it was being recorded in trash cans. But that was probably one of my first impressions when I heard it, was the snare sound. Me, I came from a thrash background, so my drum heroes were people like Gene Hoglan, Igor, Dave Lombardo, dudes that had really crisp, clean, powerful, present drum production. So to go from that to this drum sound that sounded like two trash cans being hit together, or a very dated drum machine, it takes about a minute for my ears to get used to, and then it totally becomes part of the atmosphere.
Well, yeah, I mean, they made a pretty radical departure from their earlier stuff, which was obviously intentional. And actually, the dude who did the session bass on that guy Dag Nielsen, who was in the bands when they were kind of like a normal death metal band, he played bass on that record, and then I think he took off and he was like, that's it, I'm done with you fucking guys. I think Fenris told me that or I might have read it in an interview or something, but that guy Dag was dropped off by his dad at the studio to record Blaze in the Northern Sky. And
rock and roll.
They told, yeah. And they said, okay, well, this is what our band sounds like now, and you have to use this distortion pedal. And he was like, horrified. So that was his last participation with those guys. That's why he's just a session member, because he was like, just rolled his eyes and said, whatever, if you want to make a bunch of fucking noise, then I will do that. But after that, I'm done with you guys. And that's why Nocturnal Culto switched to bass.
Right. Yeah, sonically, it was absolutely a departure.
Yeah, but important thing about that record is the cowbell.
Yes, I was going to mention that. It's got that nasty, heavy-ass cowbell.
It's got the cowbell because the cowbell showed their connection to the old school stuff. No band who's going to be trying to be the grimmest, most satanic, fucking hateful bands in the world is going to whip out the cowbell. And this is before Will Ferrell, too. This is just when a cowbell was just a cowbell, but still, it was an obvious reference to like kind of like old rock and metal, and you're like,
Motley Crue.
yeah, absolutely. Ooh, live wire. He could have just as easily Fenris hit the fucking bell of the ride to get across the same count, but he went for the good old cowbell, and that showed me that these guys had a good old school feel. Something as dumb as just deciding to use the cowbell. It just showed it was like a reference. It was like, so hail to the cowbell.
Yeah, I agree. Those guys, they have their influences and they're not just obsessed. You can hear in their music and in their songwriting, they're metal fans at large, not just trying to be the most cult band of all, not just trying to be pure, raw black metal, even though they did that very well. And one of the other impressions that I had when I revisited this album in preparation of talking to you was during the first song, Catharian Life Code. It's a 10-minute rager. It kicks off with those hyper blast beats. I still call those style of blast beats Darkthrone blast beats because that's what I think of whenever you hear those.
Right.
But about 5 minutes in, it shifts gears into this heavy, slow breakdown. And to me, that sounds like it's right out of Celtic Frost's book. And again, at the 7-minute mark, it's got this midsection that sounds like it could be off of 2 Megatherion.
Oh, there was absolutely a lot of Frost and Hellhammer going on with Darkthrone. The whole thing with the second wave of black metal, or what you want to call it, whatever, there was a lot of Bathory, a lot of Hellhammer going on there. And the whole Hellhammer, Celtic Frost, whatever you want to call that whole, period, those dudes, whatever they were doing at that time, that stuff was very prominent in that. I mean, there's stuff on their Panzerfaust record where it's just ridiculously Frost. But then again, if you listen to the first Napalm record, there's fucking Hellhammer riffs all over that too.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, so props to those guys, obviously, for inspiring a whole bunch of disparate, I don't know how you say that word, extreme metal bands. But the Frost thing, shit, dude. I mean, with Brutal Truth, every time he wrote a riff that wasn't 8,000 miles an hour, if we had a slow riff, we would not include it in the song unless it was heavy enough that you could go over it.
That's a great standard, and I must say I'm a huge fan of Extreme Conditions Demand Extreme Responses because that album is fast, but when it's got those breakdowns, it's got so many nasty-ass breakdowns, so that's been a huge part of my metalhead evolution throughout the years, so my hat is off to you. And you mentioned Darkthrone's punk rock attitude. That second song, In the Shadow of the Horns, that kicks straight out with a super punk rock sounding feel. And I think that throughout the album, they really demonstrate their range because they get really fast. They have those blast beat sections, but they also have those kind of thrashy mosh part sections. They have those really menacing mid-tempos, and they have some dissonant, evil mid-tempos and slow parts as well. So they demonstrate the range and that they could still write good songs despite being totally evil.
Yeah, I would say it's a very good, well-rounded record like that because having those kind of mixing, you got to mix stuff up with tempos or it's boring no matter what genre you're doing. Like Pure Holocaust is a great record, but it's kind of like one speed. Like Marduk, I really dig Marduk, but they are probably like 89% blast beats. And that was the thing with Extreme Conditions where we said, yeah, we're gonna play fucking crazy fast, but we got to mix it up with some slow stuff. And maybe Darkthrone were thinking the same thing in their own way, that it's important to have the really fast, intense stuff, but if you have that just all the time, there's nothing to measure it against, and it doesn't sound fast anymore because you can't compare it to anything. So there's a time and a place for that. Blurring, we do play 90% blast beats, but we have a very different nihilistic fuck you attitude, though. It's different.
Do you have a favorite song off of Blaze in the Northern Sky?
It would have to be one of those first two, either Catharian or In the Shadow of the Horns. Paragon Belial's good too. Once it gets to the second side, I don't even remember the names of the songs. I'm a stoner, but I think I would say In the Shadow of the Horns because it's got the cowbell, it's got the rip-off Sodom beat from Blasphemer with the triplet kick drum thing, and it's got the Autopsy acoustic guitar thrown in there at the end there.
Yeah.
I think it embodies all the good aspects of that record. Not to say that the other songs don't rule too, but I think if you were to pick a song off that record, so I'm gonna throw that in my next radio show. Actually, yeah.
In terms of I think my favorite song off that album is on Paragon Belial. Don't want the poser police to come after me for getting the title wrong, Paragon Belial. But in the middle of that song, it has this super dissonant guitar riff that sounds like it's right out of King Crimson. It sounds like it's off of like Red by King Crimson. And then a blast beat goes over it, and it's like the heaviest fucking thing. It's so evil.
Yeah, well, the juxtaposition of dissonance and speed is something I'm quite familiar with.
Yes. And then also, you mentioned the old school influences. The last song, The Pagan Winter, that has a super Candlemass sounding feel to it. Not that every Middle Eastern sounding scale is automatically Candlemass, but they are one of the metal bands that I think kind of made that popular. So yeah, there are a ton of old school references throughout that album if you hear it. But again, Darkthrone did a good job of tipping their hat without sounding like a direct ripoff of any of those bands.
Oh, definitely not, because you can touch upon all those influences, but as long as you put your own imprint on it, then you've actually done something instead of just a lot of bands. You could tell they're just kind of like an amalgamation of like all their influences, and they're not moving it forward or doing anything with it. I've tried to make sure the bands I play in, you could tell you got to have influences, but you also got to do something to advance it and not just be just a combination of everything you've listened to. Yeah. So that's a thin line. You got to walk it, I don't know, but it's hard to analyze stuff like that because I just do shit naturally, but I've never said, oh, fuck, I can't use this because it sounds exactly like that, because I've never written a riff like that. I've always just kind of done it naturally. I don't know.
There's always going to be somebody that might be more knowledgeable or might play music better or might be faster. You can only be you. Hey, what's up, Cat?
That's Hank. Hank's on YouTube.
Oh, Hank?
All right, he's a black cat. He wants to go.
Totally grim. I would expect no less.
No, he's whatchamacallit? He is a prince. But
Oh, sorry.
No, I got distracted. I wanted to show you the cat, and I forgot what we were talking about.
Propelling it toward the future, and I think that's what Darkthrone did, especially with those early albums, was they propelled the genre and they created a sound that was unlike anything or had its old school references, but it was presented in a sonic way that was unlike anything most people had heard before. And then while the rest of the world kind of caught up to them, and there's been countless imitators and bands that have emulated that style, Darkthrone then went back in time, and their new albums have been a lot more old school. So, they've managed to be themselves, and they've known when to kick things into, warp speed ahead and then also go back to the basics.
Yeah, because when they put out those first few very influential records, then 150 bands came out, and everybody was doing the thing. Okay, you're a musician, and you do that thing with the pinky, and then pinky on, pinky off, the black metal thing.
Yeah.
And you could tell it was just the same thing like all the genres before, and everybody heard Slayer, and then everybody started sounding like Slayer. Everybody heard Napalm Death and Carcass, it started sounding like them. Yawn, and then it happens with black metal. And that just dilutes the genre and makes it boring. And of course, the funny thing is black metal, just like hardcore, was also a very ideological genre. So had all these people doing interviews trying to convince you that they were these dark motherfuckers, and I wasn't fooled. So, people just do interviews trying to be as obnoxious and negative as possible. And I would go, hey, well, if you're that fucking misanthropic, why are you releasing a record and doing interviews?
Right.
Yeah, so fuck off.
Attention-seeking behavior. I would never stoop to such professional lows.
Exactly.
Since then, are there any black metal bands that have impressed you?
Well, I mean, I always plug my buddies in Nazul from Australia.
Oh, yes.
That is spelled Nazxul. Thank you, my dear. Uh-oh. Is this going to get bright? Oh,
Oh, wow.
yeah. Turn the light on, man. Now you can see my pentagram shirt, eh?
Totally metal, yeah.
Yeah, we live near Canada, so sometimes we say eh?
Yeah.
I got a refill.
Okay, yeah. Normally I have atmospheric mood lighting going on, but because we were talking about a blaze in the northern sky, I went super Helvet style. So only candlelight.
Yeah, I don't know if we have candles here. We got fucking spikes and fucking hatred. I don't know.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite black metal band?
I got favorite black metal records.
Yeah.
It would be a toss up between like Darkthrone. It's just, oh god, it's gonna sound typical, like Darkthrone Mayhem. I mean, one of my favorite records is Storm of the Light's Bane by Dissection.
Mm.
Although that's known as melodic death metal for whatever reason, to some people.
Which I always thought was a stupid subgenre name because most music has melodies,
Yeah, and also melodic death metal, that got carried away because then everybody thought you had to play melodic death metal, and then it became something that didn't make sense. Also, super structured death metal, like the bands like Necrophagus, where it was all perfect sounding.
Mm.
That took away something for me because it wasn't savage and brutal. I know we're digressing and not talking about Blaze, but it's some things are meant to be pure and vicious and not diluted and fucking normal sounding. Black metal, death metal, grindcore, whatever. It's got it has to have the pure essence, or it's. And I'm a 55-year-old man. I guess I'm only getting more crazy as I age, but that's my opinion.
In that realm of things, are there some bands that you're a fan of these days?
I will always give credit to Titan Blood from Spain just for being one of the most nasty, vicious bands I've ever heard. And I'll stop there.
Do you have any goals you're trying to do in the near future or distant future?
Well, if you mean musically, as soon as Boring can pick up again, we're going to got a couple of more songs to record. We did release a split with a band. Where the fuck is Cognizant from?
Texas.
We released a split with a band from Texas called Cognizant. That's with Blurring. We play it's in the grindcore genre, but it's far more number one evil and number two twisted and bizarre and atonal than what you would calling it grindcore wouldn't be fair. I wouldn't be describing it well enough. It would be like saying a Porsche is a car. And I'm not saying that because we rule. I'm just saying it wouldn't describe the full extent and potential of what we are, which is evil, atonal, nightmarish, but still well-played grind. And when the black metal band I was in up here, Nocturnal Hellstorm, broke up, I was already playing and Blurring, so I was like, okay, well, I'm still playing stuff that's fucking fairly fucking grim, so that still satisfies the criteria. I did go on to do a couple of songs at home with a little black metal thing I did, but that's not for mass consumption, only the worthy.
A lot of bands call themselves harsh or dissonant. They throw those words around loosely, but that is, in the truest sense of the word, some harsh, dissonant shit. So my hat is off to you.
Cheers, man. Yeah. That's just the way the shit's written. It's a learning curve. I am not the guy who writes a lot of that stuff. In fact, I could write riffs and hand them in, and they get fed into the grind machine. And then when they come out, they're nothing like they originally were. And they'll be like, hey, man, we got a new riff. This is the one you showed us. And then I'm like, fuck is that? Oh, then I can... There's like two trace elements of it, like, oh, that's right. I showed him that. But it got completely distorted and morphed. But that's good. I think it's interesting because having written a lot of the crazy-ass brutal truth stuff, it was refreshing to be on the other side of the gun and have to learn somebody else's crazy shit. It's because I like a challenge.
What is your secret, whatever you're willing to share and divulge, to that nasty bass tone?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the pedal I use, which is actually a guitar distortion pedal. If you're familiar with a company, what the fuck's that company called? Tech 21. Tech 21 makes a guitar pedal, not a bass pedal, a guitar pedal called the Sansamp GT2.
Yes.
SANS, it means without in French. And they also make a bass pedal, and you'll get that nice sick of it all piano growl with that. But I use the guitar pedal so I can get the full-on grind. And you do that, and it's not just having that, though. You also have to beat the fuck out of your bass. I play very aggressively. So with that tone and that approach, that's really what it is. You can't have one without the other. It won't sound like that.
What type of bass are you playing these days?
I am playing an Ibanez SJR2 or something like that. It's nice. It's purple. It looks like I play in Prince.
Nice. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the purple one.
Yeah, you can see that in those S.O.D quarantine videos.
Rock and roll, baby. Well, Dan Lilker, thank you for going one with the Grim One. This meeting was the stuff the heavy metal hard-ons were made of.
Right on, dude. And just a message out there to everybody. Fucking thanks for keeping the spirit. Do not go stand on the steps of your Capitol without a mask and talk about freedom. Be smart. Stay in. Don't be a dumbass. Hail Satan.
Yes, listen to this man, and listen to his records. You might learn something. Dan, I will see you in hell, baby.
All right, dude.
It's not a phase that I'm going through. This is a war, and I'm coming for you. I'll rip out your heart, and I'll spill my seed.